Last Friday in the boardroom, my husband's dad, the CEO, fired me cold in front of everyone, but I just smiled and said thanks. As 22 teammates silently walked out behind me, Nia smirked until Legal whispered, "Get the lawyer now." I didn't even sit all the way down before he said it. 5 minutes, clear your desk. My husband's father, Robert Stanton, CEO of Stanton Dynamics, didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The whole 18th floor conference room in downtown Denver went silent, like someone had slammed a fist onto a mute button. I felt 20 pairs of eyes on me, some confused, some already looking away, pretending they hadn't heard what they definitely had. My husband, Mark, stood against the wall, arms crossed, jaw clenched, acting like he hadn't known this was coming. But his eyes told the truth. He'd known exactly. He just didn't think I'd fight it. The long walnut table gleamed under the fluorescent ceiling lights. My laptop sat open in front of me, still showing the financial risk report I'd spent all weekend building. The same report I'd discovered had been quietly altered. The same report I refused to sign when the numbers didn't match reality. Beside Robert, Nia, the new VP who'd arrived 8 months ago and immediately decided I was her competition, leaned back in her chair with a slow, satisfied smile. "This is for the best," she said lightly, tilting her head like she was offering condolences at a funeral. "We need team players." Team players. That was rich, coming from the woman who doctored projections to impress the board. I looked at Robert, then at Mark, then at the screen again. My hands were steady. My pulse wasn't. I could feel it thudding in my throat, loud enough that I wondered if anyone else could hear it. "You're firing me," I said quietly, not asking. Confirming, Robert clasped his hands on the table. "For insubordination, yes, you refused to sign off on departmental numbers. That's a direct violation of—" "It's a violation," I cut in, "to sign fraudulent data." A ripple went through the room, tiny gasps, shifting chairs, nervous glances. No one dared speak. Mark stepped forward. "Dad, maybe we should." Robert raised a hand. Mark went silent. "You have 5 minutes," Robert repeated. "Security will escort you." I felt the humiliation hit first, hot, suffocating, like my skin was being peeled back in front of all of them. Then the anger landed, cold and clarifying. I remembered all the times I'd defended this family, all the nights I'd worked without pay to help the business, all the loyalty I'd carved out of myself to prove I belonged. I looked straight at Nia. Her smirk deepened. That was when something in me just shifted. Instead of crying, arguing, or begging, which I knew Robert expected, I pushed my chair back, stood up, and smoothed my blazer. My voice came out steady. "Thank you." A strange, sharp stillness filled the room. Robert blinked. Mark's mouth fell open. Nia's smirk wavered just an inch. I unplugged my laptop, closed it calmly, and walked toward the door with my head high. Halfway there, I heard a chair scrape behind me, then another, then more. I turned. One by one, the people I had trained, defended, and stayed late with my team were standing. 22 of them, silent, unmoving, waiting for me. My throat tightened so fast I couldn't breathe. Nia shot up from her chair, face twisting. "What are you doing? Sit down, all of you." But they didn't. They followed me quietly, deliberately out the door. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard the voice of the legal director, Harold, rising inside the conference room. Not loud, just terrified. "Get the lawyer, now." The door slammed shut behind me. I wasn't born into their world. That was always the part people whispered about when they thought I couldn't hear. How I'd come from a 2-bedroom duplex in Aurora and somehow married into the Stanton family, Denver's version of royalty. They built their money on aerospace components back when Mark's grandfather ran the company out of a metal garage. By the time I met Mark at CU Boulder, Stanton Dynamics was already the kind of place where interns wore tailored suits. I never cared about any of that. I cared about Mark, at least the version of him I met in college. He was warm then, funny, a little shy. He liked that I wasn't impressed with his last name. I liked that he didn't make me feel small for where I came from. But his family, they never hid what they thought. At our engagement dinner, Robert leaned across the table, swirling his bourbon, and asked, "So what do you bring to our son's future, Nia?" He'd said my name wrong, called me Nia instead of Mia, and didn't bother correcting himself even when Mark jumped in. I spent the rest of the night, smiling through the sick heat, crawling up my chest. His wife, Elaine, gave me a thin, polite grin every time our eyes met, like she was trying to remember what my purpose was. Still, I tried. I offered to help with holiday events, charity auctions, anything that would make me feel less like an intruder. I thought effort would earn acceptance. I was wrong. The first real crack between Mark and me happened 3 years into our marriage, when his sister accused me of undermining her in a board meeting. I had corrected a budget figure she misreported, something I would have done for anyone. She cried to their parents, and suddenly the story flipped. I was abrasive, difficult, too ambitious. Mark defended me, but quietly. Too quietly. When Robert invited me to join Stanton Dynamics as a financial analyst, I thought maybe it was a peace offering. I didn't realize then that he wanted the free labor of a family member he felt entitled to control. But the job mattered to me. I loved the numbers, the forecasting, the puzzle of making a chaotic machine work smoothly. And for a while I was good at it, good enough that people trusted me, relied on me. My department became a place that felt like mine. Then 8 months ago, everything changed. Robert hired Nia, the real one this time, fresh from a competitor, with a resume full of buzzwords and a smile sharpened like a blade. She wasted no time making her intentions clear. At her first leadership meeting, she pulled me aside. "I know you've had privileges here," she said, eyes glinting, "but I'm not interested in charity hires." I should have walked then. I didn't. Instead, I worked harder later trying to outpace whatever storm she was building. But she was strategic. She sought alliances. She planted doubts. She found every insecurity I'd ever had and pressed until it bruised. 3 weeks ago, I discovered what she was really doing, adjusting quarterly projections to hide overspending on her pet initiatives. Too much money, moving in too many suspicious ways. I brought it to Mark first, hoping he'd be the voice of reason. He told me to let it go. That sentence cracked something I didn't know could break. If he wasn't on my side anymore, what did I have left inside that building? Which brings me to last week, when Robert asked me to sign off on numbers I knew were fabricated. I refused. And that refusal is the reason he stood in front of the entire leadership team today, looked me in the eye, and humiliated me with a smile. But what none of them, not Robert, not Mark, not even Nia, expected was how many people would follow me out. And they definitely didn't expect Harold, the legal director, to turn white and whisper for a lawyer the moment I left the room. When those doors shut behind me and the 22 people trailing after me, I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck. Shame, adrenaline, disbelief all tangled together. The hallway outside the conference room was too bright, too quiet. My legs felt unsteady, like I'd stepped off a moving train. But everyone was looking at me, not for direction. For confirmation, like they needed to know they hadn't just thrown away their careers for someone who would crumble. I swallowed hard and managed. "Let's go to the break room." We moved in a tight cluster, quiet except for the shuffle of footsteps. As soon as the door closed behind us, the room erupted. Whispers, questions, anger bubbling over. People I'd coached through their first presentations, people who'd trusted me long before today, were gripping my arms, telling me they weren't staying for corruption, that they believed me. I held it together for them, nodding, grounding myself in their certainty even as mine was slipping. But underneath their loyalty was a raw, ugly truth. I had no plan, no job, no marriage I could trust, no protection, and no idea what Robert Stanton would do next. I left them for a moment and stepped into the hallway alone. That's when my phone buzzed. "Mark, where are you? Stop making this worse. Come back so we can fix it. Fix it." Like this was a PR issue. Like I hadn't just been fired and publicly dressed down by his father. Like he hadn't known. My chest tightened with the kind of grief that doesn't sit still, it claws. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to my office, grabbed the essentials, laptop, external drive, a notebook full of handwritten audit notes, and slid them into my bag. Security hadn't shown up yet, maybe because Harold was in a panic, or maybe because Robert assumed humiliation was enough to make me obedient. He never understood me. When I returned to the break room, everyone went quiet. "I need you all to do what's best for you," I said, voice low. "I can't ask anyone to resign. I don't know what happens next." They exchanged glances. It was Maya, my senior analyst, who stepped forward. Her eyes were glassy, but her voice was firm. "We're leaving because you fought for the truth. You didn't let them bury it. We're not staying in a place that punishes integrity." Her certainty steadied something in me, And that steadiness grew into something else, resolve. Because the truth was, I hadn't stopped digging after finding the fabricated numbers. I'd spent nights tracing funds, cross-checking vendors, pulling transactional logs. There was a pattern, one I didn't fully understand yet, but it was enough to terrify Harold. Enough to make him demand a lawyer. Enough to make Robert scramble. But none of that mattered if I didn't survive the fallout. I took a long breath. Okay, I said finally. We're not done, but before anything else, I need to get out of this building. We made our way to the elevators, the group forming a protective ring around me. When the doors opened on the ground floor, a few execs standing in the lobby stared like they were watching a scandal unfold in real time. Maybe they were. Outside, the cold Denver air slapped me in the face. It woke something up. My team huddled near me on the sidewalk, unsure what to do next. I didn't have answers yet. Just a growing certainty that everything I'd uncovered, the altered projections, the hidden spending, the pressure to sign, was bigger than a power struggle with Nia. This wasn't ego. This wasn't office politics. This was criminal. And if they were willing to fire me publicly, humiliate me, and risk a mass exodus to protect those numbers, then they were more afraid of what I knew than I realized. I tightened my grip on my bag. The first twist was coming. I just didn't know yet how deep it went. I didn't make it 2 blocks from the Stanton Dynamics building before my phone rang again, this time from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Miss Stanton," a calm male voice said. I froze. No one called me that except people who didn't know the family dynamics well, people who assumed the last name meant unity instead of fracture. "Yes," I said cautiously. "This is Special Agent Ruiz with the Denver field office." A pause. "We need to speak with you regarding ongoing financial irregularities at Stanton Dynamics." For a second, the street noise around me blurred. Cars passed. Someone laughed behind me. My team hovered a few feet away, giving me space but watching closely. Agent Ruiz continued, his tone measured, like he was used to delivering bad news gently. "We were contacted by your company's legal director an hour ago," he said. "He indicated you may have information relevant to our investigation." My breath left my body. Harold. That panicked whisper, "Get the lawyer." Now, he hadn't said it to protect the company. He'd said it because law enforcement was already circling. I don't understand," I said, though I did. I understood too well. "Investigation into what exactly?" "We can discuss that in person," Ruiz replied. "But I'll tell you this much. Certain expenditures and vendor payments match patterns we've been tracking in a separate case. We believe someone inside Stanton Dynamics has been funneling funds into shell corporations. The altered projections you refuse to sign off on, those may be part of a broader concealment strategy." My knees went weak. I leaned against the cold brick wall of the building beside me. Shell corporations, concealment strategy, federal investigation. Robert hadn't fired me out of anger or embarrassment. He'd fired me because my refusal to sign had exposed a fracture in his company's protection. He'd needed me silenced instantly, publicly, before I connected the dots. Before anyone else realized what those numbers actually meant. But that wasn't the twist. Not yet. Ruiz cleared his throat, voice shifting slightly. "We also have reason to believe your husband may have knowledge of these activities." My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. "Mark." No. Mark was weak, complacent, blind, but criminal. But the memories rushed in anyway. The late nights he said he was helping his dad. The tense phone calls he'd take outside, pacing the yard. The sudden new truck he claimed was a deal from a buddy. The way he'd told me to let it go when I found the altered projections. "Are you saying he's involved?" I whispered. "I'm saying," Ruiz replied carefully, "someone with his system credentials accessed financial records tied to the suspicious accounts. Whether he did so knowingly is what we're trying to determine." A ringing started in my ears. My fingers went numb around the phone. Mark wasn't protecting his father. He wasn't protecting the company. He was protecting himself. My marriage wasn't collateral damage in this. It was part of the machinery. "I need you to come in today," Ruiz said. "You're not under investigation, but your safety, professional and otherwise, may be at risk depending on who becomes aware of your cooperation." Safety. The word landed like a blade. Someone tugged lightly on my sleeve. Maya, her face pale. "Is everything okay?" I lowered the phone from my ear but couldn't speak yet. Couldn't form anything coherent. Because the pieces had finally rearranged themselves, the reason Harold panicked. The reason Robert fired me so brutally. The reason my husband stood silent in that room. They knew the investigation was closing in, and they needed a scapegoat. Me. I put the phone back to my ear. My voice came out steady, almost eerily calm. Agent Ruiz, tell me where to meet you. The investigation wasn't the twist. Realizing my husband might have helped set me up, that was the twist, and it changed everything. I didn't tell my team about the call, not yet. They were loyal, but this was larger than all of us, and I couldn't risk pulling them into something that might hurt them. So I told them the cleanest truth I could manage. I need to meet with someone, I said quietly. Go home. We'll regroup tomorrow. They didn't want to leave, not after walking out with me, but one by one they nodded. Maya hugged me fiercely, whispering, whatever you're about to do, be careful. The rest drifted off into the chilly Denver afternoon, shoulders hunched, hands stuffed into pockets, each of them understanding something heavy was shifting, even if they didn't know what it was. Once they were gone, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the contact I'd never thought I'd use. The number of a former corporate attorney I'd met at a compliance conference in Chicago years ago. She'd told me, half joking, if you ever see real fraud, call me before you call anyone else. I'd laughed then. I wasn't laughing now. She answered on the second ring. Mia, I need representation, I said. Today, her tone changed instantly. Where are you? I gave her the address Agent Ruiz had texted, an unmarked federal building downtown. She exhaled slowly. All right, I'll meet you there. Do not talk to anyone else. Not your company, not your husband. No one. The mention of Mark scraped raw across my chest. After hanging up, I sat in my car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel until my fingers hurt. Anger pulsed hot under my skin, but it wasn't the frantic, choking anger from before. It was colder now, deliberate. A shape forming. If Mark was involved, if he had used me, lied to me, let me walk blind into a setup, then the man I married didn't exist. And the man standing beside his father this morning hadn't been afraid for me. He'd been afraid of me. Once that realization settled, something inside me hardened. Revenge wasn't just about humiliation anymore. It wasn't even about the firing. It was about survival. It was about exposing the entire network that had tried to make me their shield, their scapegoat, their sacrifice. And if they wanted to ruin me quietly, then I would dismantle them publicly. By the time I reached the federal building, the sun had dropped lower behind the skyline, throwing long shadows across the glass entrance. My attorney, Sandra Lively, arrived minutes after I did, her coat flapping behind her as she strode up. Mia, she said, gripping my shoulder. You did the right thing calling me, and you're going to keep doing exactly what I say, understood? I nodded, grateful for her steadiness. Inside, the building smelled like paper, old carpet, and the kind of emptiness that comes from people who work long hours chasing truths most companies hope stay buried. Agent Ruiz met us in a small interview room. He wasn't intimidating, just observant in a way that made lies impossible. Before we sat, Sandra lifted a hand. Ground rules. My client is here voluntarily. She is not to be treated as a suspect. She will not be signing any statements until I review all materials. Ruiz nodded. We're on the same page. She's not in trouble. If anything, she's the first person who didn't run from the truth. I sat, bracing myself. Tell me what you know. He opened a file and slid several documents toward me, vendor invoices, transfer summaries, internal approvals. My heart stopped cold. The signatures, the access logs, the timestamps. They weren't my husband's, they were mine. Dozens of approvals tied to shell vendors. Dozens of fraudulent edits, all stamped with my ID, my name. I didn't do these, I said instantly, breath shaking. I believe you, Ruiz said. Because whoever did this is very good. They copied your keystroke patterns, your approval timing, even your phrasing in internal notes. This wasn't sloppy. It was engineered. Sandra leaned in. So someone impersonated her, Ruiz nodded once. For months. I felt sick. Months. Meaning the moment I'd become inconvenient, or the moment someone realized my audit work was getting too close, they'd set the trap. And there was only one person with intimate access to both my system credentials and my personal patterns. My husband. My voice came out hollow. They were never trying to silence me today. They were preparing to destroy me. Ruiz held my gaze. Unless you strike first. Cold clarity washed over me. Retaliation wasn't optional. It was survival. Sandra had stepped out to take a call, leaving me alone with Agent Ruiz and the stack of documents that felt like they were vibrating under my hands. My name was everywhere. Dozens of forged approvals. Digital fingerprints mimicking mine so precisely it made my skin crawl. The room felt too small, too dim, like the walls were leaning in. I stared at one page in particular, an authorization for a $480,000 transfer to a vendor I'd never heard of. The signature looked exactly like mine. The phrasing in the internal note sounded like something I'd write after a long day. But the timestamp, 2:14 a.m. on a night I remembered vividly, made my stomach flip. That was the night I'd been home alone, while Mark claimed he was at the office finalizing a presentation. Except he wasn't. I'd woken at 2:10 a.m. when he quietly slipped back into the bedroom, smelling like cold air and stale coffee. He'd slid into bed, pulled me close, and whispered, "Go back to sleep." He wasn't finalizing a presentation. He was framing me. The door opened and Sandra walked back in, her face tight with something sharper than concern. She closed the door behind her and set her phone on the table. "New development," she said, "and you're not going to like it." Ruiz straightened. "Go ahead." Sandra looked at me. I just got off a call with a contact at a private cybersecurity firm I sometimes use for corporate cases. I asked him to run a preliminary background check on the shell corporations listed in these documents. She tapped the stack. And one of them, just one, has a real physical address. My pulse jumped. "Where?" She hesitated for half a second. "Your home." The room tilted so fast I had to grab the table to steady myself. "My home," I said. "No, that's impossible. It's a mailbox drop inside a UPS store," she clarified gently, "but the rental is under someone who used your residential address as their verification anchor." My chest tightened. "Who?" "That's the second part," she said. "The ID on file belongs to a woman named—" She didn't get to finish. Because Agent Ruiz's phone buzzed and he glanced at the screen. His eyes narrowed. "That can't be right." "Ruiz," Sandra pressed. He stood abruptly. "I need you both to stay calm." Then he turned the screen toward me. It was a DMV photo. A woman with straight black hair, sharp features, perfect makeup, smiling like she owned every room she stepped into. The name beneath it, NIA Caldwell. For a moment I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't understand how the ground under me had just given way again. "Nia rented the mailbox," I whispered. Ruiz nodded. "6 months ago, she listed your home address as her residency verification, which means she either had access to your personal documents or someone inside your home supplied them." The floor seemed to drop out of my body. Mark hadn't framed me alone. He'd done it with her. The late-night texts he'd brushed off. The quiet phone calls outside. The tension between them that I'd felt but dismissed as workplace friction. It wasn't friction. It was intimacy. Collusion. Two people who needed each other to pull off something this surgical. Sandra folded her arms, jaw tight. This wasn't just corporate fraud. This was a coordinated setup between your husband and the VP who's been gunning for your job since the day she arrived. Ruiz added quietly, "And now that you've been fired and tied to fraudulent activity, you were meant to be the fall. The scapegoat protects everyone else, until the federal investigation completes and the narrative points to you." I pressed a hand to my mouth, a wave of nausea rolling through me. But beneath the horror, beneath the betrayal burning like acid, something else was rising, something sharp, focused, lethal. "I'm done reacting," I said, voice low. "I want to take them apart." Ruiz met my eyes. "Then you need to hear the rest." "The rest," I choked. "There's more," he nodded grimly. "The shell companies tied to those fraudulent transfers, they weren't created to siphon money out of Stanton Dynamics." He flipped another folder open. "They were created to siphon money into something else." I stared at the document. My stomach dropped again, because the something else was a property acquisition, a large one. A multi-million-dollar project in Mark's name, funded by stolen company money and rooted through fake vendors attributed to me. They weren't just framing me. They were building a future together. A future paid for with my destruction. The second twist wasn't betrayal. It was realizing the betrayal had been planned for half a year. Sandra stepped out again to make copies, leaving me and Agent Ruiz in the interview room that suddenly felt like it had its own gravity. I couldn't stop staring at the document showing the property acquisition. A sprawling development plot outside Golden, Colorado, 20 acres, slated for future commercial expansion. Price tag: $14.2 million. Purchased under an LLC registered to Mark, financed by funds wired through the shell corporations tied to my credentials. They weren't even hiding their ambition. They were hiding behind me. I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to slow the shaking. Why would they do this? I said. Why go this far? Ruiz tapped a pen against the table, thinking. For people like your father-in-law, fraud isn't emotional. It's an equation: risk versus reward, exposure versus control. I'm not talking about Robert, I snapped, heat rising. I'm talking about Mark, my husband. Why would he do this to me? Ruiz studied me with an almost uncomfortable patience. Because he needed two things, he said quietly: a fall person and freedom. I felt the word like a blade sliding under my ribs. Freedom from what? From you, Ruiz said bluntly. From the marriage. From the limitations he thought you placed on his career. From the image his family crafted around him. That doesn't make sense, I whispered. I never held him back. Not in the way you think, he said. Sandra returned then, but paused when she saw my expression. Did he tell you? Ruiz nodded for her to sit. She did, folding her hands, gaze steady. Mia, she said, your husband didn't just want you out of the company. He wanted you erased from the Stanton narrative. Permanently. And the only way to do that without drawing suspicion was to make you look dangerous, unstable, reckless, corrupt. Every word felt like ice against my skin, but Ruiz wasn't finished. There's something else, he said, sliding a printed email chain toward me. My own name was highlighted throughout it. I skimmed the lines and nausea washed over me. This wasn't numbers. This wasn't projections. This wasn't even fraud. It was my marriage, pulled apart in writing. Emails between Mark and Nia, discussions about positioning the narrative, comments about my predictable conscience. And then the message that broke something in me I didn't know could break. She'll fight the numbers. She always does. It's perfect. When she refuses to sign, Dad will have grounds to fire her publicly. Once she's out, we leak what we need to leak. The feds will pick her up before she knows what hit her. Clean exit for all of us, all of us. The words blurred. I forced myself to keep reading. Another line from Nia, and after this you're not tied to her anymore. We can move forward without the mess. Without the mess. My throat closed. I remembered the nights Mark told me I was too sensitive when I confronted him about his distance. The times he accused me of overreacting, when I brought up how Nia seemed overly involved with him, and how he always made me feel like the unstable one. It wasn't carelessness. It was conditioning. Ruiz leaned forward. You weren't just the scapegoat, you were the obstacle. I stared at him, unable to swallow the knot forming in my throat. The obstacle, I repeated. Yes, Ruiz said. To the life he wanted. To the promotion he was promised if he helped clean up the company's books. To the relationship he was already building with her. To the future they had planned with that land purchase. You weren't someone he fell out of love with. You were someone who made him feel small. Sandra exhaled sharply. And people who feel small around someone who knows the truth about them. They don't walk away, they eliminate. The word hung there. Eliminate. They had wanted to eliminate me socially, professionally, legally. With federal charges, public disgrace, and a narrative so airtight the world would never doubt it. I sat back, breath shaking, body cold. So that's it, I whispered. Their reason is that I made him feel inadequate. Ruiz's voice was steady. No, their reason is this: you were the one thing they couldn't control. You had integrity. You had credibility. And you had people who trusted you more than they trusted them. In their world, that makes you dangerous. Dangerous, because I wouldn't lie, because I wouldn't bend. Because they couldn't predict what I'd do once I uncovered the truth. They weren't afraid of my mistakes. They were afraid of my accuracy. And that fear had pushed them into something monstrous. I straightened in my chair, blood warming again, not with grief this time, but with something sharper, cleaner: resolve. They want to eliminate me, I said quietly. Fine. Then I'll make sure I'm the last person they ever underestimate. Ruiz nodded slowly. Good, because now everything depends on what you do next. And what I planned next would change everything. Sandra didn't take her eyes off me as Ruiz laid out the roadmap. At first the words felt distant, muffled, like I was underwater. But then something inside me snapped into focus. A clean, sharp line between the life I'd lived and the one I was about to build out of ash. Your husband and Nia think you're cornered, Ruiz said. That's the advantage, Sandra added. We don't strike with emotion. We strike with precision. I nodded slowly, feeling the pieces fall into place. We spent the next 2 hours drafting a plan that didn't just defend me, it gutted their entire strategy from the inside out. Step 1. Formal whistleblower protection. Ruiz made the call from the room. The process started immediately. Once in place, firing me was no longer just unethical, it was retaliation against a protected witness. Step 2. Secure the evidence they didn't know I had. My audit notes, the flagged transactions, the inconsistencies in timestamps, the vendor list, every breadcrumb I'd collected while they thought I was harmless. Step 3. Controlled disclosure. I wouldn't go public, not yet. The feds needed time. My attorney needed leverage, but the board needed to know the truth before Robert could poison the narrative. Step 4. Expose the internal conspiracy, not through emotion, through evidence, through timelines, through metadata, through every digital fingerprint they thought they'd erased. When the meeting ended, I stepped outside into the cold Denver night with Sandra at my side. She squeezed my arm. This is going to get ugly, she warned. It already is, I said. Now it just becomes accurate. The confrontation I drove home at 9:11 p.m., the house was dark except for the kitchen light. Mark was sitting at the island, nursing a whiskey, staring at the door like he'd been rehearsing. Mia, he said, standing quickly. Jesus, finally, I've been calling you all day. We need to talk, Dad said you stormed out. No, I said, dropping my bag on the table. You and I are going to talk, and you're not going to lie this time. He froze. His face flickered, anger, confusion, then the smug calm he used whenever he wanted me to feel unreasonable. Baby, you're taking this too personally. I slid the printed emails across the counter. He went white. His mouth opened, then closed. His pulse fluttered at his neck. Where did you get these? The better question, I said quietly, is why you wrote them. He stepped back, chest rising fast. You don't understand, this is taken out of context. I cut him off. You framed me, you and Nia, the shell vendors, the approvals, the mailbox you let her rent using our address, the land you bought using stolen money. His legs buckled slightly, and for a moment he wasn't the confident Stanton heir, he was a trapped animal searching for an exit. You don't know what you're talking about, he managed. I looked him dead in the eye. The federal agents do, he froze. For the first time since the nightmare began, I was the quiet one, the still one, the one he could no longer manipulate. They know everything, I said. And if you're smart, you'll get a lawyer, tonight. He grabbed the back of a chair, knuckles white. Mia, you're blowing up our lives. No, I said. You and Nia did that 6 months ago. He whispered, I love you. I didn't blink. No. You loved the version of me who didn't see the truth. He sank into the chair, covering his face with his hands. But I wasn't done. I filed as a federal whistleblower. Your father's firing is now retaliation. The board will see the evidence before he can twist the story. And you, I paused. You're done, Mark, not because you hurt me, but because you underestimated me. I grabbed my bag. He looked up, eyes red. Where are you going? Forward, I said, and walked out. The next week moved like a controlled burn. The board demanded emergency meetings. Investigators swarmed corporate offices. Harold turned state's witness. Nia resigned before dawn 2 days later. Mark lawyered up, and Robert, powerful, arrogant Robert, was escorted out of Stanton Dynamics under federal order. My name was cleared before charges could ever be drafted. Their reputations weren't. My team, those 22 people, sent me a bouquet with a card that said only, "We knew who you were before they tried to rewrite you." I didn't respond right away. I just sat with the words. Some endings are clean. Mine wasn't. But it was honest. And when I finally slept, really slept for the first time in weeks, one truth settled deep in my bones. They tried to erase me. I made sure the world would remember them instead.